isn't happy with that, or doesn't want that, please, I would ask you to perhaps sign out, and we will ensure that the literature and anything comes out to you, if that's okay. So, first question then, I will ask this to the panel. So if somebody would like to jump in first, and then feel free for the other panelists to contribute. So our first question is, what is the difference between the terms neurodiversity and neurodivergent, and how should we actually use them?
Oh, can I respond first, because this is such an important part of understanding around neurodiversity, and it's one of the aspects of neurodiversity that is so commonly misunderstood, and words become misused. And I really, anything I'm about to share, I share this with graciousness. For when we're learning, we get things wrong, and it's okay if you get the words wrong from time to time. So neurodiversity is the full spectrum of diversity across all human brains. Every single human being falls within that spectrum of neurodiversity. It's a biological element of who we are as humans. So therefore, a population of people can be neurodiverse, but an individual cannot be neurodiverse. An individual can be neurodivergent, which means that their particular neurotype, the way their brain is wired, differs significantly from the predominant societal norm of how people function within neurodiversity. So we have a commonly used phrase, neurotypical, which Dr. Luke Bearden has come up with a wonderful phrase, which I am now using instead of neurotypical, which is the predominant neurotype, or PNT. So in my family, in our household, the PNT here, the predominant neurotype, is autistic. But in society at large, the predominant neurotype is not autistic. So as an autistic individual in our society, I am neurodivergent. But we are all under the umbrella of neurodiversity.
Does anybody have anything else to add to that?
I can't add to what Bea said, because she just says it so brilliantly. But what I would say is I'll just beg anyone listening to this to understand the importance of language and the narrative around being neurodivergent and the neurodiversity paradigm. I think it's almost akin to sort of gaslighting when people say, oh, it doesn't really matter. Well, actually, when it's your identity, it really does matter. Yeah. So the way in which one is referred to, I think, is just in terms of humankind and respect at the very least, but actually the sort of levels of trauma that society inflicts on neurodivergent individuals, even within the narrative around referring to people in the wrong way. I think at the very least we could get that right. It doesn't cost anybody anything, just takes a bit of an effort. Just in terms of that, it reminded me, I was speaking at a conference this morning and somebody said my own personal perspective. I'm like, oh bro, that's a triple tautology, what a waste of words. But anyway, that's a separate thing about language.
Okay, so bearing in mind all these differences then, do you celebrate your neurodivergence? And if so, would you like to give me examples of some of the ways it's positively enhanced your life or your work?
Ooh.
How would you celebrate?
I would, I do. For a long time, I didn't, because I got my diagnosis late. So I regularly thought that I was, I regularly felt out of place in lots of situations and had to come up with coping mechanisms and all sorts of things. I've accepted, and I really feel lightened having got my diagnosis. It means I've got all sorts of coping mechanisms, and I can talk kind of freely about it and enjoy conversations like this and get support. For me, and you know, I'm neurodivergent on multiple levels, but dominant is ADHD. And for me, somebody kind of referred to it as a superpower. And for me, it does feel like a superpower. I do things differently. I think differently, and I celebrate that. I see it as a real quality to bring to my work, to my friendships, to my family. So I do celebrate, yes, very much so.
Excellent. And as you were saying, you had diagnosis late. Somebody was saying to me that getting a diagnosis through the NHS is extremely difficult, and private is very expensive. So even if someone's done the AQ online test, they may lack the confidence to refer themselves to themselves as autistic. Are there any other online tests that you would recommend that might give a person like that confidence to self-identify?
So I'll share a little bit about my journey, because I think a lot of my journey actually kind of answers some of these questions. So when I turned 40, that was my aha moment of realizing I was autistic. And like a lot of late diagnosed women, that came through my son being referred for an autism assessment, and I dived in, did lots of research, and I went from quickly going, he can't be autistic, to, oh, that's like me, that's like me, that's like me, that's like me. I was like, maybe we're both autistic. So I self-identified as being autistic when I was 40, but I did the AQ test, for those who aren't aware, is the autism quotient test. It was devised by Simon Baron-Cohen and others out of the University of Cambridge. For a lot of autistic people, it's a really great indicator, but it actually has been created from quite a narrow body of understanding of autism. So a lot of certainly female presenting autistic individuals don't score well on that test. I happen to score quite highly on it, but I know plenty of autistic women who don't score highly on it at all. So I think this idea of needing to kind of prove our autistic way of being, or our ADHD way of being, or whatever it is, really is deeply rooted in the medical paradigm of neurodiversity. And if we move into the neurodiversity paradigm, where we understand that all brains are different, and perhaps even think of it, you know, similarly to the fact that we have such a huge spectrum of diversity in our sexuality, we no longer need to kind of diagnose someone as homosexual, which is how it was at one time. We don't question it if someone says, you know, yes, I'm gay or I'm bi or whatever. And so actually the confidence thing is less about needing tests to show that you are autistic or ADHD without the opportunity to receive a formal diagnosis or a formal identification. I think it's more about exploring it so that you become more centered and confident in your own identity. Because my autistic, ADHD, and I also am PDA, which not everyone recognizes PDA. So that's a whole other thing. I'm going to park that. But anyway, I present totally differently to my son, who is also autistic, ADHD, and PDA. And we both present totally differently to my other son, who's also autistic. So it's about you, it's about your identity, less about what a quiz can tell you and what a professional can tell you. And I think really we need to be moving more and more into a place where we're not looking for formal diagnosis to prove who we are and how our brains work, but we need to become societally and within the workplace far more understanding of this difference that goes across all human brains, and therefore how do we support each other so that everyone is thriving.
And much as I'd love to listen to B all day, just picking up on that, other people can disagree with me. The concept of presentation, I think it's great that B mentioned that, but from a societal perspective and people who don't have the expertise that B does, I would suggest there's no such thing as an autism presentation. If there was, then I mean, it almost alludes to the fact that you can see somebody's autism, which is complete nonsense. If you could, then getting that identification would be dead easy. And as we know, it's not. Very quickly, in terms of so going back to what you were saying, Chris, about the difficulties in getting an identification, I use the term very specifically identification rather than diagnosis, because diagnosis has those negative medical model connotations. You get diagnosed when there's something wrong with you. But actually, just to think about it for a second, we've got the Equality Act, that states essentially that if you are at a substantial disadvantage, if reasonable adjustments are not made, if you are autistic and you're at a substantial disadvantage by not having that identification, then it is a 2-year waiting list unlawful. And I would argue that it actually is. And the other thing that I would say, and I love this concept, I was writing about it last week. If you think you might be autistic and you're thinking, I really want to know whether I am or not, ask yourself why you're asking the question. But the other thing that I love the idea of, I think the sentence I wrote, put on your autistic hat or cloak or onesie or article of choice, develop yourself into it and just think, how comfortable a fit is this? Just assume you are and see how comfortable it makes you feel. And it's incredible the results that some people have reported back when they've done that within 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days. All of a sudden it's like, okay, now it all makes sense. I don't have to mask anymore. I can wear my autism cloak.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Can I just jump in here?
Yes.
Yeah. This is going back to the earlier question, actually. You guys have covered this part very well. And yeah, I can't do any more. But just back to the celebrating the benefits or the wins, I feel like we didn't get enough time to embellish in that. And I really want to just kind of share mine, because I work with a lot of people who struggle with their dyslexia, ADHD, etc., and don't see the strengths of it. So I think there can be a lot to be done in just kind of raising the profile of actually we are awesome and there are amazing traits and things we can do as a result, and just sharing some of mine that I think might relate to those who are considering it for themselves or employers. I think one thing that has clearly been a thing for me is special interest, and the fact that I dive so deep into a specific area and become an expert and so skilled. That's kind of one definite benefit for sure. Yeah. I think, and the other two I just wanted to mention, one is less groupthink. So because I think so differently to the majority, which Mel, just going back to what you were saying, I was diagnosed just recently as well, but once upon a time, for the majority of my life actually to date, I avoided and hid my difference in my thinking and my physical being and everything. Yeah. But actually that is my strength, being able to shake up, same yes. in an environment and bring about innovation, creativity, and all those good juicy things. And just the last point, which again I think is really powerful and big, is empathy. And we know what that means, sure, but actually going on the journey of learning more about myself, understanding myself and the things that I struggle with has allowed me to have empathy for other people in a way that I didn't before. And I say that really candidly, to the point that actually I wasn't very nice in some areas. But going on that journey and understanding myself allowed me to understand people and be more graceful with them, which then goes on to create a safer environment for them to thrive and be their true selves. I'm going to leave that there because I feel like I've said a lot of words, but I just wanted to touch on that.
Lovely. And that's perfectly fine that we go back and forwards in questions because of the nature of the event, because our brains all think very differently, then I'm sure there is an expectation that this might happen in our event, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I love that you brought us back to that, Crystal. I mean, my mind is trying to jump in on various questions that we've had with like new answers, but also wanting to create space for like other questions. But I love that you brought us back to that, because one of the things that feels really important to me around this, and I really, it's totally valid for someone to experience their neurodivergent as superpowers, but I think it's really important to recognize the level of disability that some, perhaps many neurodivergent individuals experience because of the way our society is set up, because of the way our workplaces are set up, because of the way we predominantly communicate. And I am someone who a lot of people are very shocked to discover is autistic. I am what I've heard people describe as neurotypical passing, meaning I appear like the predominant neurotype, which surprises me, but that doesn't matter. But people are very shocked when they discover how high my support needs are and the level of support that I need to function in my business, to function in my personal life, to function as a homemaker. And it's wonderful to focus on the strengths that we have, and we really do have these wonderful, if you look at the spiky profile of strengths and challenges amongst neurodivergent individuals, we have incredible strengths, but often the challenges that some of us are experiencing prevent us from operating in our strengths, because we're always just trying to stay above water when it comes to our challenges. And I think that that's a really important element to understand, especially for in the workplace or in education environments. You know, we want we want everyone to thrive, and we might think, oh, brilliant, you know, B's a great candidate because she's got these exceptional exceptional ability to notice patterns where other people don't. She has this extraordinary understanding of human understanding and why of human behavior and why conflicts are occurring or why people are behaving in this way. And B is able to articulate when she's in a flow state. And, you know, people might look at me and go, B's got all these things, but actually if my support needs are not met, I can't operate in those strengths because I'm just coping with my challenges. So I wanted to bring that into that superpowers conversation because I think it's a really important part.
Yeah, okay. So if we think about the workplace then and experiences in the workplace, what can organisations do and managers to easily raise awareness of neurodiversity with employees so that they can become aware of what things they need to be aware of when working alongside people perhaps with autism or ADHD? What can organisations and managers do to heighten awareness and have inclusivity?
I think
they can.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, Luke, go for it.
I think the first thing I'd say is get rid of autism awareness. We don't need to be aware of autistic people. We know they're there. They've got a pretty strong voice, a lot of individuals. Acceptance is a much better term, I think, but it was, and also do away with autism awareness days and weeks. It's like, if you're autistic all year round, not just for 1 week or 1 month. Just picking up on what Crystal was saying, that lovely concept of safety and the lovely concept of empathy, and then going back to what B was saying about the spiky profile. So I always talk about my self-professed golden equation: autism plus environment equals outcome, or person plus environment equals outcome. You're not going to change somebody being autistic or having ADHD. If you want to change the outcome, you need to change the environment, not change the person. So in terms of employment, my rule is, if you're doing things that suit most people, you're doing it wrong for the person who is not the same as everybody else. So if you've got a bell curve of predominant neurotype, if you fall outside of that bell curve, then doing things differently is an essential item. And I think I'm getting more and more into the concept of autistic safety and how much it breaks my heart that most of the PNT feel relatively safe most of the time. Most neurodivergent people feel unsafe as a normal state of being. So anything an employer can do to reduce anxiety, to increase genuine inclusivity, not integration, but what inclusion should be based on autistic or neurodivergent well-being, and that should be based entirely on what makes you feel safe, you as an individual human being. And I think when it comes to employment in general, it's not a case of why should we employ a neurodivergent person, it's what role can we provide that is going to be best match for us and for that individual. And at the moment, because we have generic job descriptions and everybody's got to be a good communicator, for example, what does that even mean? I'm a brilliant communicator via email, I'm rubbish on the telephone. Does that make me good or bad? So to do away with this very one size fits all and having a much more individualized approach is literally going to benefit everybody.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Luke, you're so amazing. Just love listening to you. It's really interesting what you just said. You described yourself as, and I've never spoken to you on the phone, but you've described yourself as, like, you know, being rubbish on the phone but brilliant on email. And I've noticed that you are so responsive on email, whereas email for me is an area of incredible challenge. I have a support worker who specifically helps manage my inbox for me and supports me with email. But if someone jumps on Zoom with me and I have the opportunity to see them, because I do struggle on the phone if I don't know what that person looks like when they're speaking. But if I can see someone, this kind of one-to-one situation is great for me. So I think it's really helpful just to, I don't know, that felt important to put that in there for some reason. There were two things that I wanted to say. One is that when we're thinking about neurodivergent individuals, autism and ADHD get a lot of airspace, but there are plenty of other ways to have a different brain. And we've created, those of us who are contributing to this panel, we've created a resource document. It's quite comprehensive, and we're going to be sending it out to you in the next 24 hours or so. And there's so much information that will explain a lot of this in deeper ways. But we've got, you know, dysgraphic people, dyslexic individuals, individuals with Tourette syndrome. There are other types of neurodivergence as well. So one of the things that I do work with organizations to help them make the changes they need to make to become these safe and responsive places for neurodivergent employees. So one thing you can do is you can hire me. I am available. But one of the things that I always say to my clients is what you do to benefit your neurodivergent employees benefits everybody. And I think that's such an important thing to remember when you're looking at what changes you can make. Is sometimes clients think, oh, but that's gonna, I don't know, that's too big a thing, or that's going to cost a lot or whatever. But it's always an investment in absolutely everybody in your organization, whether it's making changes around using plain English and having clarity in your communication, avoiding jargon, using accessible fonts, having standardized kind of visual graphics that are accessible and inclusive. It's allowing different processing times, so understanding that not everybody can process at the same speed in a meeting. So having things set up so people can reflect back on things rather than the expectation being that it all happens in a meeting. When you meet someone for the first time, perhaps in an interview situation or onboarding a new team member, you might say to them, you know, is there anything that you'd like to share with me that will, you know, will make this meeting me easier for you? Or if you're feeling brave enough, because I've learned that some people feel too vulnerable doing this, but you could say to someone, as an example, you know, I concentrate best when I'm not making eye contact. So if I'm looking at the corner of the room or over your head, I'm really paying attention. Is there anything that you'd like me to know about you that will support our working relationship together? So in general, it's lots of small things that we can all do, and we don't need to do them all at once, but everything that we do benefits everybody, not just neurodivergent beings.
Thank you, and that's answered one of my next questions, actually, B. So thank you for that, because that's tailed nicely into one of the questions.
Sorry, can I just jump in just on a little point on the end of that? Because I thought it's itching. I feel like it might be really relevant. I really like your point, B, as well, about the different processing times. I think that's one that we easily forget, allowing people, and as well, different forms of feedback, or, you know, coming back to somebody. It could be email, voice note, you know, however best suits the individual. And just another point I wanted to make about the initial questions around what support do you need. I think it might also be useful to frame that without even using the word neurodiversity or neurodivergence, and just kind of focus on what support do you need, full stop. Because thinking back to us late, you know, diagnosed people, we, you know, if you'd asked me several years ago, are you neurodiverse and do you need support in that particular area, I would have been like, no, I'm fine. But actually, if someone had specifically said, there's certain areas that you need extra support with, and I could focus on that, then I can say what support I need, and then hopefully, you know, my employer can make those adjustments. Just a slight nuance there in terms of people not being aware of those challenges and not knowing that language. You know, obviously everybody on the call now is learning loads about this stuff, but there are still loads of people who don't know, but could still benefit from getting that support. Yeah, I just wanted to make that point.
I just wanted, I'll try to be really, really quick, but just to add to what Crystal was saying, I think from an employment perspective, well, from a societal perspective, but we're talking about employment, a very general rule is the more flexible and range of options you have available to everybody, the less likely you are to be discriminatory. And that goes from everything. So say, for example, any new employee, you might say, okay, we have a whole range of different types of communication. Exactly what Chris was just saying. We use Zoom sometimes. We sometimes use phones. Which is your order of preference? doesn't matter whether you're declared neurodivergent or not. We're just going to do it for everybody. I would take it a step back and say, when you apply for this job, we've got a range of different ways that you can apply. So you might do a video of yourself if you don't like filling in application forms. We've got a range of ways of identifying whether you're any good for the job. So if you think you can demonstrate your skills by interview, we'll interview you. If you prefer doing it in a different way, and have a whole range of different ways that are available to everybody. It doesn't actually cost any more money. It might just take a little bit more effort, but the more flexible the options, all the way through, say for a university, from applying to a university all the way through to graduation, the more flexible the options, the less chances there are of risk of discrimination.
Okay. So thinking about jobs and employment opportunities, there's a belief that Sheffield doesn't have many employment opportunities with those who are seen to have learning difficulties or disabilities. There are some, but they're quite restrictive. Do you have any ideas on how we can create simple ways for those who are in this category to enter into employment? And actually, how can we get more employers on board and thinking about that and making that happen?
I think a good start would be just probably prompting lots of employers and just suggest that whether you know it or not, you probably already are employing neurodivergent people. They might not know it themselves, and not to be scared. Individuals are individuals, and actually, going back to what I was saying earlier, matching skills. Everybody's got some skills. Matching skills with roles, rather than saying this is a job you need to be able to fulfill all of it, is probably a reasonable starting point.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Luke. And I do a lot of work with within life sciences and within the tech space. And I was at a conference last week in Sheffield, and we were talking about just this point and the fact that there's a few panels coming up that I was talking on. And a chap that I was discussing it with kind of laughed and said, whilst you're discussing all of this, you have to probably consider the dominant neurotype within tech is probably neurodivergent. So I think it's a really valid point. Yeah, interesting.
Can I just add one last thing on that? There was some language in the question that I felt a little bit of discomfort around. Can you just repeat the question for me, Chris?
Yeah.
If I can tune into it, I'll just...
The interesting thing for me is you've picked up on the language. I know Luke has, B, you have, in the questions I'm asking, and bearing in mind that these are questions that have been sent to us prior from people who are neurodivergent. The language they're choosing says something about the awareness, doesn't it? That they're actually using language that is not necessarily how it should be seen. Does that make sense with what I'm saying?
Yes, and I'm not wanting to criticize language. It's more I need a repeat of the question so I can just tune into what the thought coming up for me was.
Okay, so Sheffield doesn't have many employment opportunities for those with learning difficulties, stroke disabilities. There are some that are quite restrictive. Any ideas on how we can create simple ways for those who are in this category to enter into employment? How can we get more employers on board?
Okay.
But it's very much about the language is labelling and categorising, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's okay. I think I understand what they are. I understand what this person is asking, and I think it was really interesting because I just felt this sense of dis-ease in my body, and I was kind of like, what is that? Because often my body speaks to me kind of much louder than anything else. And when you read it through again, it's something, I don't know if I can even articulate it well enough in the space that I've got here. I may need to go away and think about it, but it's something around, for as long as we focus on the difference or the othering of so we're all humans having a human experience. We're all on a spectrum of how how we learn, the speed at which we learn, how we communicate, you know, like this whole spectrum of neurodiversity is affecting every human. I think because humans in general, and there's an irony here because this is quite an autistic trait, but humans in general, we like to categorize, we like to label, we like to go, I can put that person in that box because they tick these boxes. And then we like to go, well, because I've put them in that box, then I know what I need to, I don't know, do with them or how I need to respond to them. And I think that if we move more into a paradigm of kind of really acknowledging just the breadth of human experience, this goes back a little bit to something Luke said around creating, you know, we have all these options available for how we communicate, for how we recruit, for how we onboard new staff, for how we respond to like working hours versus completing the work that's, you know, required of you. And so I think when we look at individuals who have differences in terms of how they learn, their speed of learning, or experience quite clear disability because of the way organizations are set up and society is set up, it is really then looking at I love metaphors, but I know that some brains really struggle with them because I like the playfulness of the language, but they're definitely not literal. I want to say like leveling the playing field, but that's not necessarily clear for all brains. But for me, this is about equity. So we hear people talk a lot about equality, which is making sure everything is the same for everyone. Making sure everything is the same for everyone is useless because people start at different places. So equity is giving people what they need to have the same access to whatever we're talking to. So if you imagine on one side of a high wall is the most extraordinary football match ever going, and you've got people of different heights, and one person can see over that wall without standing on anything. And if you gave everyone else a 2-foot box, maybe 2 of the other people would then be able to see over the wall, but you've still got 2 others who can't. Equality is giving everyone a 2-foot box, and then the tall person gets to see even more. Equity is giving people the box height that they need so that they all get to see that football match over the wall. So we come back to this, and how do we create more opportunities for different types of individuals? To me, it's about equity, and equity means we have to be open to really widening what we make available. I hope that made sense, or at least some of it.
He's absolutely spot on. Equity over equality any day of the week. But I do what I really think is the case, and I wouldn't have a go at anybody, and I don't even know who's in the audience. So yeah. What I believe to be the case is that and it makes perfect sense that employers do things that suit most people most of the time, because that's efficient and effective, and it works for most people. If you are willing and able to engage with individuals who are beyond that most people, then by definition you're going to have to do things differently, and that's perfectly okay. Be it you're allowed to come into work and work from 9 till 3 without a break because that suits you. This person can have a break for 10 minutes every hour because that suits you. And in fact, it's down to you in terms of your productivity, your effectiveness, your efficiency. If it's a case of when I've got my headphones on, don't come and talk to me, but when my headphones are off, I'm prepared to be able to engage. Whatever suits the individual. And the bottom line is productivity goes up. It's kind of like giving somebody the option of working from home or working in an open plan office. Open plan offices, so I'm led to believe, suit some people, bizarrely. For me, it's just the idea of absolute hideousness. Tuck me away in a corner in my own home, my productivity will go through the roof. Stick me in that open plan office, might as well not give me a job. So again, it's just working out that different things suit different people at different times, and embrace that and say, that's okay. Not doing things in the same way all of the time is perfectly acceptable.
Can I just jump in here, just a tad? Seems like I keep saying that, jumping in, but let me contribute. I think I just want to jump on the part about increased productivity and actually in terms of the outcomes of the organization. So obviously my thing is finance, personal and business. And in terms of organizations who are, you know, they're seeking to make a profit and all of that good stuff, accommodating individual needs is, like Lutz said, only going to help them perform, do their work healthier. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about maintaining whatever they need to maintain to allow them to produce the right work. So that's all you're doing, basically. You're understanding what is going to help this person thrive. At the end of the day, everybody wins. This person's healthier, happier. The business is performing better. It's a no-brainer. So I think the question kind of ended with, how do we get employers on board with that? And that's the anchoring piece for employers, if that's their focus, not just the mental health and well-being, but even for the business. The business case is sound and solid. And I'm just going to drop this in here because I think it's really fascinating. Given my backgrounds in behavioural science, I think it's Oxford University are doing a massive study about the well-being score quotient, I can't remember what it's called, but actually looking at how that correlates perfectly with the value of the company. So if you put efforts into supporting people being better with their well-being, mental health, all that good stuff, the company is better. I think they track the stock price or the share price or something. But yeah, the stats are there to support. It's not just people saying, give me what I need. And it's actually, it makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, perfect. So why do you think that few employers offer higher level jobs perhaps requiring a degree, on a 3 or 4 day a week or 5-6 hour per day basis, which would suit many autistic adults better than full-time posts, as they become less exhausted and hence perform even better, which comes into what you've just been talking about, Crystal? Why do you think fewer employers offer those level of jobs?
I'll get myself into trouble because I work at an institution where we have work plans. Please, can we stop this concept that time equals anything? Please, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. From my point of view, pay me to do a job and let me do it. If I'm not doing it properly, get rid of me or tell me off or whatever. I'm perfectly capable of working out how most effective I can work. I used to beat myself up so much about it, and I'd wake up and I'd write a chapter of a book, and then it'd be 11 o'clock in the morning and I'm thinking, oh God, I've done all the work I'm supposed to have done today. Right, I need to and try and figure out what else to do, and then I'll be absolutely shattered in the afternoon. I work in incredibly intensive short periods of time, and I'm incredibly productive in those periods of time. The rest of the day I'm useless. Whereas if you tried to make me work at other people's levels for the whole day, I just couldn't do it. I really wish we'd get paid to do a job rather than get paid for the time to do it.
Yes, and I think again that's tightening awareness and understanding of employers, and getting to look at the most, not just efficient way of working, but effective way of working, to get the best out of everyone. Thank you. So anxiety, because obviously if you're anxious at work, if you are pressured, anxiety is a key issue for neurodivergent people and children. How do we ensure employers are more tuned into this?
Well, the answer that wants to come to me first is not specifically answering that question, but I'm aware that this isn't something that we give much space to in the resource that we're sharing, but it is something that I spend a lot of time speaking about and working with my clients on. So when we're experiencing anxiety or stress, or it's because our nervous system is on high alert. And our nervous system jumps to high alert because this little bit of our brain called the amygdala goes, warning, warning, threat alert. It's not really, probably in most situations, a threat, but a lot of neurodivergent individuals have especially sensitive nervous systems. So we can be spending so much of our days with this high alert nervous system. which we often experience as anxiety. And when our nervous system goes into that high alert state, this front part of the brain, you can go and look up what it's called. That part of your brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex. Oh my God, why could I not talk about it without naming it? Anyway, it is responsible for your emotional regulation. It is responsible for your solution, your ability to find solutions, your ability to think things through, your ability to create new things. It's responsible for your ability to predict the consequences of your behaviors or to think through the long-term consequences of a decision. When we're in that high alert state, that part of our brain shuts down, and that is the part of our brain that we all need in the workplace. So to come back to the question, which I've actually forgotten, I just know it's about anxiety, we need to create cultures, whether that's in school, in university, in the workplace, wherever just in life, that support people to down-regulate their nervous system. The more down-regulated our nervous system is, the calmer we feel in ourselves, but also this front part of our brain comes back online, and then we're more able to regulate our emotions, find solutions, think creatively, all those other things I mentioned. A lot of people, because they don't understand that dynamic between what's happening with their nervous system and how they're feeling, what they're thinking, they then don't know how to respond to it. So this is where neurodiversity and well-being kind of weave together in a really beautiful way, but they often actually don't get talked about together. But one of the things that I'm actually looking to trial with an organization at the moment, I'm just trying to find the right organization, is organizations that are very heavy on Teams meetings. I'm looking to trial with an organization for 1 month only to receive feedback, having a 2 to 3 minute audio at the beginning of the meeting and at the end of the meeting that connects every individual on that call with their body and with their breath and a moment, so that their nervous system down regulates going into that meeting. And then at the end, it would be another recording that would also connect them with their body and their breath and just being present in the moment to down regulate them going into the next thing. The reason I want to trial that is because I really believe that just such small little moments throughout the day, in the workplace, in schools, in universities, at home, where we are connecting with what's going on in our body, down regulating our nervous system, we're supporting ourselves to reduce anxiety all the time. And then our brains are functioning better. And, you know, that capacity that leads to greater capability within organizations invariably goes up.
Lovely. And I guess if your brain is on high alert all the time, what's the likelihood that you then get burnout?
It's people talk about burnout, and totally justifiably, there's increasing evidence demonstrating exactly what B said in terms of that, the amygdala and the fight, flight, freeze response. If you're in that state, not continuously, literally, but frequently on a day-to-day basis, you're far more likely to end up with long-term health conditions like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, those sorts of things, where it is demonstrable that your level of anxiety correlates very directly to your physical health and mental health, obviously. And I think that it's so distressing, because by that point, very often it's almost too late, because you've lived that entire life, those decades of that high level of anxiety. So taking it absolutely seriously. And again, I mentioned gaslighting earlier, but it's too easy, I think, sometimes to say things like, oh, you don't need to worry about that. It's kind of like, well, if I didn't need to worry about it, I wouldn't. So actually just saying that is completely meaningless. And actually, just even if you don't share the same anxiety, just absolutely 100% accepting what your neurodivergent employee is saying to you, this causes me anxiety. Like I overshare, but if any of you really want to freak me out, especially if you're in my organization, just say, oh, Luke, can we just have 5 minutes at some point today? I assume I'm getting the sack, 100%. I'm assuming that I've done something horribly wrong that I've subsequently got amnesia about, and I have no idea what, but I am definitely the worst person in the universe. Or if you really want to freak me out, just phone me on my mobile from a withheld number. I'm not going to answer it because I'm absolutely stressed to the hill, but then I'm stressed to the hill because you haven't left a message, so I've no idea. Again, I'm just assuming somebody's died, or even worse, I've done something terribly wrong and I'm going to get the sack. So, and other people don't apparently have a problem with those sorts of things. But if we can encourage people to share what does cause you anxiety, and we'll do absolutely everything in our power to avoid that, that will go such a long way towards reducing anxiety, which then allows people to be better cognitively able to process information and actually get on with doing their job.
Yeah. So how important is it then when you take on a new employee, as managers, you have those conversations and you find out the best ways to communicate the things that affect us so that we can be aware of it and work and communicate and be in harmony?
Can I just jump in here on that actually, and kind of linking it back to the earlier question about, I can't remember who I was speaking to, but someone just the other day about how often managers fall into the manager role. It just happens. They just fall into it. And often it's not supported by training as to how to be an effective manager. And just linking back to the points that Bea and Luke said about understanding, or like the question here, it's how can you best support your staff, your employees to perform their best at work? And there's a training piece for the manager to understand and have empathy and be open to those differences and how best those people work. So I think going back to the employer focused question and what can be done, we can easily flippantly say training, education, all of that good stuff, but I think focusing on those people who are managing and supporting others, making sure that they're upskilled with having empathy, being open to difference, being accepting and understanding. When someone has a request that you're not used to, is completely different that you've ever to something you've ever encountered before, having the empathy as a default to be like, okay, as long as, like Luke said before, the focus is them achieving whatever task, getting that done, then fine. Being able to create that space for them to come to you with that request, which would hopefully reduce the anxiety because they can be themselves, be honest with their manager, knowing the manager's not going to shun them, put them down, make them feel silly, which I'm sure we've all had experience of bosses that they're not great.
Yeah. And I guess as well, it's about taking away that uncertainty in every situation so that, you're on an even keel, as it were. Cool.
I just wanted to add one last thing onto that, which is, I think so often there is an onus on the neurodivergent individual to know what they need, to know what their triggers are, to know what support they need. But actually for many neurodivergent individuals don't even necessarily know they're neurodivergent. They just might be walking around like I did for 40 years, feeling like a failure at everything. Like Luke, I'm exactly the same as you say, Bea, can I have a chat? I am straight away thinking, oh my God, I've done something wrong, I've really upset them. And then until that chat, when they might just say to me, oh my God, Bea, I watched one of your videos and it was amazing, but like I'm expecting the worst. So, but I think when we expect the neurodivergent individual to be able to come up with all this stuff, we're actually creating a lot of mental load for them. So instead of thinking about individuals really knowing like what they need and what challenges they might be experiencing, if we can accept that a lot of neurodivergent individuals may not know they're neurodivergent, may in their head just be walking around feeling like a chaotic mess or a failure, or they might be putting on an amazing front at work, masking with every ounce of their being to appear like they've got it all together, and then going home to 3 days worth of washing up, a washing machine that's full of smelly laundry because they had forgotten to take it out. They've got bills piling up. They are having relationship problems for whatever reason. Like at home, it could be a completely different picture. So if organizations, and this pulls in what Crystal says, this is really about training as well, ensure that the foundations of the organizational culture support everybody's mental health, support everybody's well-being, support everybody's nervous systems. And so we can say, look, here's this incredible buffet of things that are available to support you. Why don't you grab a plate and choose the bits from the buffet that are going to work for you? And then if you want to come back for seconds and you realize, actually, I didn't really like that thing there, but I want to try this, great, let's try it. And just one other thing is, if an employee does say, look, I really need this thing, and it might be something you've never considered before, and maybe your first response is, no way can we do that. I think it's really important to step back and go, why do I think we can't do that? Is it just because we've never done that? That's not what I've grown to expect. Actually, can I really evidence why we can't do that? And working towards the possibility that actually, no, yeah, we can do that. We've just never done it before. I've never known anyone else do it before, but let's do it.
Yeah.
I feel like, sorry, at this point we have to mention access to work. And if we don't, I speak to people every day, literally yesterday, who does not know about access to work, and it's basically funding to support people who need support working. It's money from the government, it's free, it's a grant. The employee can request it through work. If you're self-employed also, you can request it. I just have to put that out there because it's a missed opportunity that we can take advantage of. It's a bunch of money for free that will support the business to support the employee. And
how do you access that, Crystal?
Literally Google access to work. And I don't know, maybe it should be on the doc, but if you just literally Google access to work, you'll see the government page and you can just go and apply.
I'm really happy to put that in the resource guide. That's totally fine. I do just want to, and I receive so much support from Access to Work. It isn't easy to go through the Access to Work application process. It's quite disabling in and of itself. And I needed my support worker to do that for me. So I want to straight up say it is incredible. It's not easy to go through the process, and it requires your employer to be willing. It's different for me, I'm self-employed, but if you work for an employer, it does require them to be willing to contribute financially to part of your support, and then the government pulls in another part. And I know people who have received access to work recommendations, but their employer has said that they can't make it possible. So it is brilliant, and I think, yes, let's put it in the resource, because the government's trying to do something good, but it also isn't necessarily as easy as it could be.
It's like with most of these things.
And just finally, there's an interesting story coming to the chat, which just shows the need for awareness with who you have in front of me. Someone has an autistic daughter with an EHCP, part of a mock interview, supported internship, and the interviewer in their feedback said you had a lack of eye contact, and the daughter was very confused, but Mum, that's what I do. So a learning curve for the interviewer, the awareness thing. And on assessment day, she did really well, but she mentioned to the panel she gets anxious. And this was raised as an issue in the feedback, and she didn't get to the next stage. So there's a whole big gap there, isn't there? And the opportunities that people are missing just because their brains work in a different way.
Just really quickly, just because otherwise I won't be able to sleep tonight, get it off my chest. Rhetorical question: how many of us know people who are rubbish at their jobs and should never have been employed? Of those individuals, how many of them were interviewed as part of the process to identify whether they were any good? And thirdly, when they were given the sack, how did we then go back out to find new people? We interviewed them. Why do we keep doing it?
Yeah, because absolutely, some people are very good at talking a good job on an interview, and it's very much, can you do the job? It's not about time, it's about the skills to do the job, isn't it?
And as a brilliant example of a Sheffield company who are nailing that, my eldest son has for 3 years been seeking an engineering apprenticeship, and he just recently responded to an opportunity at a Sheffield company. They're an engineering and technology company. They're quite small, and they invited him in for a trial day where he'd get an opportunity to meet people, to have a go at things, to find out more. And that day, it was him and 5 other young people. As part of that day, there was a presentation. There were 4 or 5 different activities that they were all asked to do. They were interviewed, but it was like a very informal chat. It wasn't presented like and now we're going to interview you. So the day moved between things that they did together, things that they did on their own. There were several different ways that the company was getting to know these individuals in order to explore who might be the best fit for the role. And it was just wonderful hearing him talk about how that day was for him. His face just lit up, because this process of the initial stages of recruitment was just so brilliant, because he said it didn't matter where he might have been weaker, because he knew that there were areas where he was stronger. And I just was like, wow, this company gave up a whole day, set up all these different things, but it really met so many different needs. And the interview was a very casual thing, very different to any other interview that he'd been in.
Perfect. We're on time now, so we have managed to get through the questions. I've tried to bring in some of the things that have appeared on chat. If there's anything else still unanswered, as Bea said earlier, those answers I think you will find in the document that will be sent out to you tomorrow. Please feel free to share that document more broadly if it is of interest to other parties. And once again, thank you so much. I hope it's been very useful and very informative for you. And maybe this is just the first of many. So thanks once again and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.